kill me now. Stephen Woodford, also known as Rationality Rules on YouTube, has found himself in some hot water after publishing a video called The Athletic Advantage of Transgender Women. The video was, as any of you who know anything about trans discourse might expect, a heavily biased, pseudoscientific attack on trans women. I'm not going into the science because I'm just not that good at reading studies, but thankfully, I don't have to. Peter/Ethel and editor of EssenceOfThought already released a video thoroughly debunking all of Woodford's shoddy arguments. I've linked that video down below if you're interested, but the short version is that all the current empirical evidence supports the conclusion that trans women who have been on estrogen for at least a year aren't at an unfair advantage over cis women because of the effect that estrogen has on bone density and muscle mass, and this is further supported by the fact that trans women have been allowed to compete as women in the Olympics for the past 15 years, yet we still see plenty of cis women in the Olympics anyway. Both scientific evidence and simple observation have conclusively disproven Woodford's assertions. He is objectively wrong. Do we understand? Good. But I'm not very concerned about proving Woodford wrong, because he was always going to be wrong, because he is not smarter than the entire medical community. No, instead, I'm interested in looking at the way in which he conducted his discussion and how it betrays his transphobia. Before we start that discussion, though, I have to clarify what transphobia is. A lot of people are under the impression that in order to be transphobic, you have to have an overt hatred of trans people, that it doesn't count as transphobia unless you're leading the lynchings and setting up the concentration camps. But that's not how transphobia works. You can be transphobic by accident. Most people are. You can be transphobic without knowing it. Most people are. You can be transphobic in the name of concern for both cis and trans people. The overwhelming majority of people are. Transphobia isn't just a bold-faced hatred of trans people. Any kind of bias will do. So, what are some examples of Woodford's bias? Well, to begin with, throughout his video, he talks about trans women like they're not real women. Not only does he insist on calling cis women biological women, a scientifically inaccurate term that transphobes use in order to exclude and misgender trans women while maintaining plausible deniability, but at one point he doesn't even bother doing that much, and he compares trans women to simply women. The message is loud and fucking clear. Trans women are not real women as far as Woodford is concerned. Now, am I saying that I think Woodford decided to use this particular wording on purpose? Do I think he cackled about his devious plan to get away with degrading trans women, perhaps while twirling a comically long mustache? No, absolutely not. I think he decided on this wording without really thinking about it, which is precisely why I think he's transphobic. Remember how I said that transphobia doesn't have to be intentional or malicious? This is what I mean. Woodford wasn't trying to degrade trans women, and that is my point. Talking about trans women as if they're not really women was acceptable to him because he naturally thinks of them as being fake women because he is transphobic. What's wrong? Is that not concrete enough for you? Well, I'm afraid that's all I've got. Nah, I'm just kidding. I have more. Let's start by looking at his first argument.
This is Selena Soul. She's 16 years old, is 5'6", weighs 115 pounds, and she's damn fast. She recently ran the SEAC Women's 55-metre dash in just 7.36 seconds. But because Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood, who are both transgender women, so easily took first and second place, Selena was eliminated. The story made national headlines after Selena's mother made a formal complaint, and since then Selena has had to bravely explain why she feels cheated to countless news networks and critics.
I have no problem with them being a girl and wanting to be a girl. My issue is with CAC.
So the top 6 spots qualify for the New England meet, and I came in 8th place, and the 2 transgender athletes came 1 and 2. So if they weren't there, then my friend and I from another school would have been in those 2 spots and would have qualified.
And so here we have a very real example of a young, talented woman losing a potential scholarship and career due to this issue.
Do you see the transphobia? I'll admit it's easily missed by the untrained eye, so I'll give you a second. Okay, the problem is he has endless empathy for the cis girl, but he doesn't have a hint of empathy for the trans girls. He talks about how distraught Selena is for losing out on a scholarship, But he doesn't talk about how distressing it is for Andrea and Terry to be treated like boys, to be excluded, to be degraded, and to be attacked. This poor little 16-year-old girl bravely went to the media to talk about how she didn't get a scholarship she might have lost out on anyway and could simply live without. But what about Andrea Yearwood, the 17-year-old girl who was forced into the public eye through no choice of her own, who was publicly scrutinized, bashed, and misgendered by both individual adults and entire media outlets, who will henceforth be known as the evil transgender who stole scholarships out of the mouths of real women? What does he say about her? The thought of her well-being never even entered his mind. And you can't claim that he was simply leaving out the human element for the sake of being objective and rational, because he hasn't left out the human element at all. We all heard the way he talked about Selena Soul. She's damn fast, she's brave, she's talented. Not only does he fuss over her well-being, but Woodford goes out of his way to build her up. But what about Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood? They're not fast, they're not brave, and they're not talented. To him, they're inanimate objects serving as cruel obstacles for cis women, not people in their own right with feelings and needs and dreams and fears of their own. Woodford couldn't see these people as people simply because they were trans. That is transphobic. And this isn't just a question of decorum. Because of his transphobia, he's ignored huge swaths of the science around all of this. For example, he acknowledges this argument.
Being born male, Fallon, gives you a physical advantage over a female competitor. So that's, in your opinion, is not true.
Yeah, it's not just my opinion, that's the medical community's opinion. My testosterone levels are actually lower than any female that I've ever seen.
So bottom line, being born male doesn't give you a physical advantage competing in female MMA?
No, not at all. I'm actually at a disadvantage.
So the medical consensus is that she's not at an advantage, that she might even be at a disadvantage. That's kind of huge. Like, that's a big deal. The entire medical community thinks that Woodford is wrong. Maybe there's something to this.
Now, if I'm honest, I don't just find this argument flawed, I find it utterly ridiculous. To steal an analogy from a friend, saying that transgender women should be able to compete against women so long as they identify as one and have testosterone levels lower than one is like saying that a Formula 1 car should be able to compete as a superbike so long as it identifies as one and has less fuel than one.
Gee, why do I do this to myself? So, just to underscore how ridiculous this is, if I were in Woodford's place and I just heard that the medical consensus was that trans women are not at an advantage, my first instinct would be to immediately check what the medical community is saying and what their reasoning is, just in case they maybe kinda have a point and I'm the ignorant one. Woodford doesn't do this though. His sources contain no medical research on trans women. He just says, it's ridiculous, and leaves it at that. As if this needed saying. That's not rational. That's the exact opposite of rational. One of the most basic rules of rationality, Mr. Rationality Rules, is to check your claims empirically. In fact, if we're talking about empiricism, even some fucking statistics would do. Just look at the win rates of a random sample of cis athletes and another random sample of trans athletes. It's not perfect proof, but it's at least a step in the right direction. And don't even get me started on that analogy. You don't need me to explain why it's wrong, do you? But I guess overanalysis is what you come here for, so in the human body, or even the mammal body, or even the animal body, when we talk about fuel, what we're talking about is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. That's what gives you energy. It's what you need to run, to jump, to punch, and to keep your heart beating. Testosterone and estrogen aren't part of the production of ATP. ATP is made of glucose and oxygen. What testosterone and estrogen primarily do is regulate your bone and muscle density, so a better analogy would be that it's fine for a Formula 1 car to compete as a superbike, as long as its chassis is replaced with one made of the same metals as a superbike, and its engine is replaced with a superbike engine. Not very convincing if we put it that way, is it? Now, you could argue that Woodford is just astoundingly ignorant of basic biology, but I don't buy it. This is primary school level stuff. The reason why he fucked up this badly is because he has a bias. And we know for a fact that he had a bias going into the video because he fucking admits it at the beginning of his video. Before he actually did the research, he was already under the impression that it's unfair for trans women to compete against cis women. That's why he chose to make the video in the first place. He went into this with the assumption that trans women have an unfair advantage over cis women without even checking, in the face of the medical consensus disagreeing with him. That is a transphobic bias if I ever saw one. And if that's still not enough for you, I have more. If we look at what he says in his introduction, we can see even stronger transphobia.
The transgender woman Rachel McKinnon is the UCI Masters Track Championships Women's 35 to 44 Sprint Gold Medalist. The transgender woman Laurel Hubbard won the 2017 Australian International Women's Weightlifting 90 kilo and over division. And the transgender woman Hannah Mouncey competed in the AFL Victoria's Women's League.
See the problem? No? Well, do you mind if I talk about star signs for a bit? I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So, a while ago, I found myself in a bit of an argument with some people who sold healing crystals and other assorted woo. It wasn't my fault, I promise. I tried to be respectful and leave it at saying that I personally didn't believe any of that stuff, but it was fine that they did. But they kept badgering, demeaning, and harassing me, and eventually decided, to hell with it. If they're not going to respect me, then I'm not going to respect them. So I started pointing out contradictions. Then, after some yelling on their part, one lady randomly said that I must be a Virgo. Why? Because I was logical, and Virgos are logical. Unfortunately, I did happen to be born during Virgo's dates, and she took that as definitive proof that star signs determine your personality. But what does this have to do with anything? Well, think about it. In a world where star signs don't have any bearing on personality, what would you expect to find? You'd find that people with Virgo traits fall under any and all signs, including Virgo. If people with Virgo traits were born under every single sign except Virgo, then that would itself be evidence that star signs influence personality, just in the opposite direction. The fact that I'm logical and also a Virgo doesn't prove star signs because I could be one of the people who are logical Virgos by pure coincidence. The same for trans people who win at sports. In a fair competition, you'd expect anyone to have a chance at winning, both trans women and cis women alike. If only cis women won, then that would demonstrate unfairness against trans women. And before you say it, no, it's not only trans women winning. Keep in mind that Woodford didn't present any kind of statistical report showing that the vast majority of trans women win at a higher rate than cis women. He showed 3 examples of trans women competing in sports and succeeding twice between the 3 of them. Yeah, that's right, he didn't even pick 3 winners. His last example is just of a trans woman competing, quote, and the transgender woman, Hannah Mouncey, competed in the AFL Victoria's Women's League, unquote. I was going to make this argument that trans women will win sometimes in a competition that's truly fair, but apparently, I still have to argue that it's okay for trans women to simply compete. But I know logic on its own isn't enough, so I'm going to provide some real-world examples of trans women losing to bolster my argument. Of course, I could try and handpick 3 instances of trans women who have lost competitions in order to simultaneously disprove Woodford's argument and show its flimsiness, but that information is a lot harder to find because trans woman is completely unremarkable athlete isn't a sensationalist headline, so I'll just borrow Woodford's own example instead. It's great when I can make a better argument by doing less work. He mentioned Rachel McKinnon, right? She won a women's cycling competition, and it's so unfair. But the opponent complaining about her, Jennifer Wagner, she beat McKinnon in 11 out of the 13 races they've been in together. I guess trans women do always beat cis women, as long as you ignore the overwhelming majority of instances where cis women beat trans women. Just take a moment to appreciate this. If a trans woman had an 84% success rate against a cis woman, people would be screaming bloody murder. The double standard is clear. When cis women do exceptionally well, then they're just talented athletes. But when trans women do exceptionally well, then they're cheaters. And it's not just double standards. Woodford is guilty of blatant cherry picking. Do you seriously expect me to believe that he did enough research to find out that Rachel McKinnon beat a cis woman, but not enough to find out that she was beaten by that same cis woman 11 times? Oh, who am I kidding? Of course he didn't, because all of his sources are fucking news programs. And right-wing news programs at that. Let's have a look, shall we? First we have Good Morning Britain, which, in fairness, might actually be centrist rather than right-wing. I'm not British, and I don't watch them, so I don't know. But at the very least, they're not interested in being fair to trans people. After that we have Fox fucking News, the most dishonest, most overtly right-wing program in the fucking world. And then we have Fox News again. Then we have Sky News. You know what Sky News are? They're basically Australian Fox News. Hang on, I'm getting deja vu here. Someone using right-wing news programs as their sole source of information on the LGBT plus community? Where have I seen that before? Oh, right. And you'll notice that nowhere in his sources does he have a left-wing news source, a source from any trans person or trans ally, and most importantly, he does not have a single relevant scientific source. Oh, sure, he has plenty of sources concerning cis men, but that's just another case of Woodford treating trans women like not even fake women. He's not even treating them like fake women at this point. He's treating them like fucking men in dresses. All of this is bias of the highest and most blatant degree against trans people. This is textbook transphobia. Oh, and he has one more source. Joe fucking Rogan. Not only does Woodford include Rogan, a known transphobe who has no understanding of trans people on any level, as a source, but Woodford includes Rogan's rhetoric in his own video.
Or as Joe Rogan eloquently puts it,
it's like, do you know a woman who's got a hand that looks like that?
Yeah.
Find one.
I'm afraid I have to interrupt for a second here, because I have actually seen women with hands like that. My mother often has to buy men's gloves because the ladies' gloves just won't fit her. While it's not typical for cis women to have large hands, it's still possible and it's not even that rare. Just pay attention the next time you're walking around in a city. Chances are you'll see at least one. By putting this forth as an actual argument, Rogan is being nothing less than a blind ignoramus. Okay, that's way too generous, especially for me. Rogan is being patently dishonest. And so is Woodford. I mean, really, Stephen, you're, 25? And you've never seen a woman with big hands before? I don't fucking buy it. Anyway, carry on.
I'll leave you with another gem from Joe.
There's so many women that used to be men that transition to being women that are now dominating these sports, and these women feel like they're being fucked over. Like weightlifting. There was this Australian weightlifter who's a trans woman who's competing as a woman and is fucking breaking records left and right. And everybody's like, this is crazy. She's an inspiration.
Yeah.
No, she's a guy. She used to be a guy, and now she's breaking these women's records. Like, what are we doing? This is crazy.
Yeah.
She's a guy. This is crazy. What are we doing? This is not a calm, rational, respectful discussion of trans biology. Believe it or not, there are ways to discuss biology in relation to trans people without misgendering or degrading us. For example, Rogan could have said, because she went through male puberty, her body is different from the bodies of cis women in terms of skeletal structure, muscle mass, and bone density, and these differences make it unfair and dangerous for her to compete with cis women. That statement is scientifically false, but it's not mocking trans women and their accomplishments, excluding them from womanhood, or misgendering them. Rogan could have even said, I'm concerned about trans women competing with biological women because their male traits give them unfair and dangerous advantages, and I give him a pass for it. It's not ideal, but at least he would seem to be trying to be respectful. He'd still be wrong, but he'd at least seem to be trying. My expectations are so low at this point, I let him off for seeming to be trying. But he didn't say that. He said, she's a guy. This was not respectful. It was utterly unscientific, completely unnecessary, degrading, cruel misgendering for the sake of misgendering. Make no mistake. Not only did Woodford use Rogan as a source, but he deliberately put clips of Rogan mocking, demeaning, and misgendering trans women in his video, complimented him for it, and used a clip of aggressive mocking and misgendering to close out his video. There's no two ways about it. Woodford thinks that Rogan's rhetoric is not just acceptable, but good, and that this is an appropriate way to talk about trans women. This is overt transphobia. If you try to tell anyone otherwise, then you're fucking lying. And to clarify again, because I know people will misunderstand me if I don't think that Woodford did this on purpose. I believe him when he says he has good intentions, but that's exactly my point. This is overtly transphobic, but Woodford can't see that because transphobia is his default and his normal. But this video isn't really about Woodford. Truth be told, I've always thought he was a pathetic excuse for a rationalist, and I expected less than nothing from him from the very beginning. Let's talk about Suris. Suris recently released his own video about the controversy surrounding Woodford. In his video, Suris portrays Woodford as a poor, hapless victim who wasn't at all biased and simply misunderstood the science.
From what I can tell, Stephen went into this video doing his due diligence and research, and the evidence that he found led him to his conclusion. It didn't have as much to do with defending an a priori as you could probably think otherwise. So what we have here is a case of improper conclusions being drawn.
But that isn't true, is it? Because he didn't look at the science to begin with. He went into his video with a particular conclusion in mind, and held to that conclusion in the face of the medical consensus disagreeing with him. This was absolutely about him defending an a priori, whether he was aware of it or not. Suris also completely failed to address or even acknowledge the most nakedly transphobic elements of Woodford's video, like the misgendering. Oh, I'm sorry, he mentioned that Woodford's video had some alarmist rhetoric, and he said that he disagreed with Woodford's method and conclusions, which is totally sufficient. It's not. Fun fact, this omission is what initially motivated me to make this clusterfuck of a video. Suris also redefines transphobia as being intention-based.
The second person in the audience that would pipe up here is someone who wants to muddy the definition on transphobia so much that transphobic rhetoric, however intentioned, also means that the person who said the statement is in fact a transphobe.
This shouldn't need explaining, but consider the following. I want you to stop being gay because it's not good for your health. That statement is often made with good intentions, but it is still homophobic. By telling you that someone can espouse transphobic rhetoric while not themselves being transphobic, Suris is fucking lying to you. Are you seeing a pattern yet? And he doesn't just do this for funsies. See, Suris' entire argument is that he thinks Woodford has good intentions.
Now, do I think Stephen himself is transphobic? No. Do I think that he actually meant the video to come across that way? No. I think that he honestly did what he thought was his due diligence. Because of his actions on Twitter, we are starting to see a lot of people flat out calling Stephen Woodford a transphobe, even if that couldn't be further from the truth. I truly believe, based on my interactions with Stephen, that he is a good faith actor.
Leaving aside that Woodford doesn't have good intentions, as demonstrated by his inability to take any initiative in repairing his mistakes, even if he did have good intentions, his intentions don't fucking matter. Trans people in my audience, please, comment down below. Do any of you actually give a flying fuck about Woodford's intentions? Or are you more concerned about whether or not you're going to be alive in 10 years? Manslaughter and negligence are crimes for a reason. Good intentions simply aren't good enough if your mistake is sufficiently egregious. By constantly harping on about intentions, Suris is implying that the only legitimate reason to be angry at Woodford is if he has bad intentions. That if his intentions are good, then he has to be given a free pass no matter how negligent or harmful his actions were. And I'm sure some of you are seeing the pattern by now, as these are all common tactics employed by abusers. Suris is gaslighting you. Worst of all, his intention-based rhetoric isn't even consistent, which I suppose is partly what makes it gaslighting. For all his talk of intentions, suddenly, where the atheist community of Austin is concerned, intentions don't matter quite as much.
Regardless of what the ACA intended, we have what seems to be using rationality rules for their star power, and then as soon as they catch some heat for using him in such a way, they immediately throw him under the bus with this little bit of covering the ass. If the intended message is that you don't agree with some of the transphobic conclusions in that video, then this was not the way to send that message.
Suris is perfectly capable of understanding that the consequences of your actions stand regardless of your intentions. He's simply refusing to acknowledge that fact where Woodford is concerned. And as if that's not enough, my lovely trans and trans ally viewers, Suris also strawmans every single one of you who has a problem with Woodford. Before I play this clip, I just want you to take a moment to think about how you'd like Woodford to make amends for his actions, so you know you're not being influenced by the way Suris is portraying you. Even write it down if you like. Maybe even in the comments, just so everyone can see how shockingly wrong Suris is. Are you done? Good. Here's what Suris has to say.
So, how do we handle something like this? Well, it's hard to say. The first thing would be for us to have civil disagreement. Unfortunately, based on Twitter, Steven's basically come under fire from all sides when he has literally said multiple times that he is going to be working on this video. Coming at this from the angle that you're owed this video and that it must come out at the speed in which you require it is not going to do anything to help the situation.
So, we'll get to the straw manning, but first and foremost, I want to discuss this idea that the correct way to deal with this situation is civil disagreement. Civil disagreement is a luxury and a privilege. We can have a civil disagreement about whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza because it doesn't matter either way. Even if pineapple on pizza is outlawed or legally mandated, it'd be a shame, but the world would keep turning and the effect on people's lives would be rather minor because we can easily live without delicious pizza. But if you ask me to have a civil disagreement about whether or not I'm allowed to live, to be seen on the streets, to get married, to have adequate medical care, or to be free from discrimination, and yes, that extends to sports as well, that's not going to be a civil disagreement because a disagreement over the basic rights someone requires to live a fulfilling life isn't civil. The truth is, Suris doesn't care about uncivil behavior. He's completely fine with the incivility of Woodford's video, after all. What Suris is trying to prevent here is anger. But the problem with that is that anger is the appropriate response to having one's rights attacked. Suris seems to be doing the right thing by preaching civil disagreement. He's attempting to keep the peace. But the problem is he's trying to keep the negative peace that comes with victims of injustice staying meek and silent, rather than the positive peace that comes with there being no injustice in the first place. He is simply trying to guilt and demonize trans people into silence so our grievances are easy to ignore. This tactic is universal amongst both bigots and abusers. As for the straw manning, it's in this notion that a remake of Woodford's video will solve anything. The fact is, we never asked for a remake of Woodford's video. I don't want a remake from Woodford, and I don't think any other trans person or trans ally does either. He's already demonstrated great ignorance and bias, and it's going to take him many months, or possibly years, of hard work before he can make a video on trans people that isn't going to hurt anyone. Of course, if I knew by magic that Woodford could and would make a good video on the topic of trans women in sport, then that would be completely fine. What he does in his spare time is no concern of mine as long as it's not hurting anyone. But it still wouldn't be a solution to this problem. I don't want Woodford to remake his video. I want him to make an apology video for his first video. And yes, I'm holding the fact that it's not out by now against him. I know dishonest or stupid people, like Suris, will cry that I'm being unfair, but I'm not. I'm just not. Woodford has had a month, and he's found the time to make a video about how put upon he is, so he's sure as hell had sufficient time to apologize. Actually, can we just have a look at his video? I want to show you how utterly ridiculous it is.
It is with great sorrow that I make this video.
Okay, good start. He's filled with sorrow. No doubt for his horrible behavior, his great negligence, and the harm he has caused. Right?
But I haven't really got a choice.
Oh, so he doesn't want to do it. Even now, he can't bring himself to truly care about the well-being of all the people he's harmed.
I've just got back from Texas, and despite a very sour bite to end the meal, I've had a truly amazing time.
Well, this has nothing to do with trans people, or any of his other victims. So far, all he's done is talk about himself.
But once I left the ACA's warm hospitality to fly back to England, their board of directors released a public statement denouncing me as transphobic and heavily implied that I'm opposed to the LGBT+ community.
Oh, this is just about him. Poor little Woodford is sad because he has to suffer consequences for his actions. Never mind all the other people who have had to suffer through no fault of their own. And I just have to show you this.
I've defended the LGBT+ community countless times throughout my short career, and whenever a religion or anyone denigrates them, I point it out and I crush it where it stands. I mean, I even have a video in which I explain precisely why homosexuality is natural.
He just said, I can't be transphobic because I defended gay people. Are you fucking kidding me? That is something someone would do as a joke. Someone did do that as a joke.
I'll have you know that one of my best friends happens to be a gay man. And what could be transphobic about that?
Also, Woodford, are you seriously going to harp on about the ACA wrongfully claiming that you made multiple pieces of transphobic content when you made the same mistake about your own fucking content? You more or less said that you've defended the LGBT plus community on multiple occasions, but you've only cited one example, and this is your content. You should be familiar with it. You fucking made it. Anyway, you get the idea. This isn't an apology. There's not a hint of an apology here. If anything, it's an attack, an attempt to manipulate everyone into having pity on him instead of his actual victims. Okay, back to Suris. Last but not least, Suris has majorly fucked up by claiming that we aren't owed another video and that it's wrong for us to demand he make it quickly. Let me make one thing clear. We absolutely are owed proper amends from Woodford. He has made an unprovoked attack on us that's caused real harm. He needs to be held accountable for it, and he needs to fix it. I absolutely resent the implication that I'm being petulant or unfair for demanding something from someone who's attacked and hurt me and my community. What Suris has done is attempt to shame trans people into silencing ourselves and giving up on any kind of defense of our well-being and rights. That isn't just bad for the trans community, it's intrinsically bad. We can't have people being guilted for self-advocacy. It's that sort of mindset that feeds not only oppression, but abuse. But, of course, pointing out the harm in Suris' rhetoric isn't going to be enough for a lot of people. I don't just need to prove that he's misguided, I need to prove that he's objectively wrong on every count. So, to address this, first, we need to ask why it is that Suris is trying to make us all settle down and wait patiently for Woodford to do what he will. That's simple. It's because Suris thinks that Woodford shouldn't have to suffer. Well, what a hole I've dug myself into. If Suris is saying that Woodford shouldn't have to suffer, and I'm saying he's wrong, then I'm saying that Woodford should suffer, right? Well, yes and no. Let me talk about choice for a bit. I've already mentioned it a few times. Woodford had a choice, his victims didn't. Why did I mention that? It's because choice and agency are important in determining how much pity we feel for someone. Someone who gets mauled by a dog because the dog simply chose to attack them gets more pity than someone who gets mauled by a dog because they decided to steal that dog's bone for laughs. There's a reason why people were mad about Harambe. There's a reason why a collection of stories where people got themselves killed through their own recklessness and thoughtlessness became a popular book series. If someone brings something on themselves, we have a lot less pity for them than if they're entirely innocent. Woodford deserves less pity than his victims because Woodford could have just not. There was nothing stopping him from deciding to scrap the video, or not to make it in the first place. And if he were that intent on making the video anyway, he could have chosen to actually research it properly, checking both scientific sources and trans perspectives. Hell, he could have had trans people do fact-checking and sensitivity reading. If he's famous enough to do podcasts and fly to Texas to dick about with Matt Dillahunty, then he's famous enough to do a fucking collab. He had dozens and dozens and dozens of opportunities to keep all of this from happening, but everyone else just woke up to it, and that was it. And, of course, Suris and his ilk would argue that Woodford had no way of knowing what would happen, so he was ignorant, but I have 3 counterpoints to that. First, it doesn't matter that he had no way of knowing. We're all ignorant of the consequences of our actions to some degree. There's a reason we have this concept of unintended or unexpected consequences. Of course Woodford didn't know what would happen. Literally, no one thinks he did. We just don't care because it doesn't matter. Second, my first counterpoint was somewhat of a lie. Did Woodford know these exact events would happen? Did he know the backlash would be this bad? Did he know this many people would suffer? No, of course not. If he did, he wouldn't have made the video, but he knew that he was wading into dangerous waters. Now, I could appeal to common knowledge. It's common knowledge that trans issues are extremely sensitive and fraught with controversy, and Woodford isn't a complete shut-in, so he knew that, but I won't, because I don't have to. We know he knew the risks because he admitted to it at the beginning of his video. In his poll, he doesn't just check for engagement, but opinion. If he was just checking to see if his cool new video idea was actually going to get views, he would have simply said, I'm making a video about trans women in sports and whether or not they have an unfair advantage. Are you interested? But he doesn't. He asks whether people agree with him as well. He's clearly seeing whether or not he'll get a backlash. That's literally the only reason to ask the question. So, I've demonstrated that Woodford's ignorance doesn't matter, and that he wasn't really ignorant to begin with, but even if we pretend it does and he was, there's still quite a significant reason why he doesn't deserve any pity. He can make all of this go away. Not only that, he is the only one who can make all of this go away. It's only through his sheer stubbornness that this is still a problem. If you think Woodford can't fix the situation, I have to ask you, what do you think the trans community wants? Do you think we just like picking fights for fun? Do you think our goal is to just destroy anyone who doesn't toe a ridiculously stringent and arbitrary line? No! If we weren't willing to forgive people for their ignorance, we'd have to declare war on the entire fucking world. Transphobia isn't exactly rare. Our goal isn't to make people suffer for eternity simply for making mistakes. Like with any person and any mistake, all we ask is that people demonstrate sincere regret and do their best to fix their errors. That's all anyone can expect, and that's literally all we're asking Woodford to do. The only reason there's still a problem is because he hasn't done that, and he's shown no signs of having any intention of doing that. And, at risk of repeating myself, no, the promise to remake his video doesn't count. If anything, that's a fucking threat. So, that's the long and short of it. Suris, who tried to pass himself off as a friend and ally of the trans community, has engaged in insidious psychological manipulation against all of us in the defense of transphobia. And as if that's not enough, while his sympathy and lenience for Woodford is infinite, he has no such sympathy for one of Woodford's many victims.
Now, there are some things that I don't consider to be good faith acts. These are things like releasing private DMs.
That's right. Suris attacked Ethel from EssenceOfThought. Can we take a moment to appreciate how fucking disgusting this is? Suris is comparing Ethel releasing some DMs they had with a stranger on the internet to Woodford publishing a biased, degrading, pseudoscientific attack on an oppressed minority. While I don't think either Ethel or Woodford were acting in bad faith, I know that if I had to call one of them a bad faith actor, I'd sooner amputate my own arm with a butter knife than say it was Ethel. The fact that Suris can see Woodford's video with the biased sources, the biased portrayal of cis women as victims of trans rights, the cherry picking, and the clips of Joe fucking Rogan mocking and misgendering trans women, and pass it off as a poor misunderstood bab who just didn't quite understand the science, but turn around and say that publishing DMs is malicious, it's fucking outrageous. Can you not see that Suris is taking a side? In addition to that, as if this wasn't enough already, what makes this attack on Ethel so abhorrent is that they didn't do anything wrong in the first place. Now, it's true that it's considered common decency not to publish DMs. If someone's speaking to you through DM, they go into the conversation expecting it to be private, so it's a betrayal of trust to make it public. Except, that doesn't apply here. Trust and fairness aren't anywhere near this garbage fire, and they never have been. When you betray someone's trust by attacking them, like Woodford did to the entire trans community, you have no right to demand fairness. Fairness is something you earn by being fair yourself, because if you're not fair, anyone who tries to be fair with you is only going to get hurt. Besides, Woodford and Ethel were discussing the very public controversy that they were both at the head of. Their discussion concerned the entire trans community, not just the two of them. The idea that Ethel made a private conversation public is a misrepresentation, because the conversation was never private to begin with, and if it was somehow private in any respect, if Woodford was sharing personal information like his street address or his most embarrassing childhood memory, then that's on him. Ethel had every reason and every right to release those DMs, and if Woodford went into the conversation expecting it to be private, then that's his fault for being a fucking moron. Also, can we take a moment to appreciate the double standard here? Apparently, According to Suris, Ethel and the rest of the trans community must behave perfectly with the utmost patience, tolerance, and decorum, regardless of the circumstances, even if tolerance and decorum would serve to enable transphobic bigotry or wear bad and malicious people. But if someone publishes an unprovoked, extremely biased, and factually incorrect video that emboldens people to bigotry against us, then they made some mistakes, and we need to be patient with them, and they don't owe us anything. Are you fucking kidding me? But even if we pretend that Ethel was in the wrong, there's still no reason to complain. Think about it. Either Woodford conducted himself appropriately in the DMs, in which case releasing them will only serve to mend his reputation, or Woodford did not, in which case releasing the DMs is simply holding him accountable. Anyone who insists that the DMs remain private doesn't care about fairness or good faith. They just don't. If they tell you they do, they're either lying to you or themselves. The only reason to insist that these DMs remain private is to shield Woodford from accountability. This has nothing to do with fairness and good faith. This is about poisoning the well. And this doesn't just affect the trans community, because releasing DMs and texts and Skype conversations and Discords and Snapchats is something that happens all the time to expose liars, abusers, and predators. By criticizing Ethel for this, Suris isn't just harming the trans community, he's harming anyone who might find themselves the victim of emotional or sexual abuse, which is to say, everyone. But just to clarify, I don't think Suris is acting in bad faith. While his actions could certainly be interpreted as malicious, I don't think he's actually malicious. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful thing. No, I think he's just privileged and profoundly fucking stupid. Partly he lacks insight into the harm the trans community has suffered because it's suffering he's exempt from as a cis person, but in addition to that, he's clearly not paying attention to anything he's saying in general. I know for a fact that Suris is against abuse, but his video is full to bursting with enabling nonsense. I've already said that civility is a luxury and a privilege. Turns out, so is ignorance and carelessness. Who knew? Oh, and I'm still not done, by the way. I just had to make that clarification. No, we're still not done. Suris has done even more. See, after I watched his video, I didn't just resolve to make my own video about it. I decided to leave a comment pointing out some of his errors. At the time, there were no critical comments and no dislikes, so I had to offer some dissent. So I posted a comment where I pointed out the transphobia in Woodford's video, pointed out the double standard in the way Suris treated Ethel, and questioned whether he was fit to be an ally of the trans community. The wording is overly sarcastic, I know, but this is me we're talking about. Anyway, though I wasn't expecting it, I got a response. And, yes, Suris did heart his own comment. Suris also decided to respond in reverse order for some reason. So, first argument, he said that he wasn't gaslighting anyone because he wasn't intending to. There's that intent argument again. Okay, I want everyone to listen carefully and really internalize what I'm about to say. If you tell someone they gaslighted you, or that you felt they gaslighted you, and their response is to tell you that they didn't intend to, then they're a spineless coward who's either unable or unwilling to take any responsibility for the consequences of their actions. But, more importantly, they're patently dishonest and they have no regard for your well-being. I'm a spineless coward, but you'll notice that I never do this. While I've never had an accusation of gaslighting, I've had people tell me that I'm wrong. And when that happens, I always engage with the accusation. Even when I adamantly disagree with someone's criticism, or I think, or know, they're grasping at straws just to make me look bad, I never fall back on this excuse of, I didn't intend that, or, but I did this other thing, or, I'm offended, or any other deflection that distracts from the question of what I did. At worst, I argue that I'm being strawmanned, and I always clearly explain how. If I had someone in my comments tell me that I'd ignored blatant bigotry in a video I was discussing, my reaction would be to get more information so I could check, to ask for a timestamp, or a quote, or some idea of what I was looking for. I wouldn't just ignore or dismiss an accusation like that. If someone tells you that they didn't intend to gaslight you, then they are fucking with you. It's right there in what they say. By talking about intentions, they're subtly shifting the conversation away from this question of what they did to what they were trying to do, and at risk of repeating myself to an absurd degree, what they intended doesn't fucking matter. The fact is, honest people who care about the well-being of other people do not brush off accusations of gaslighting because they don't want to do it on purpose or by accident. Anyway, back to Suris' comment. He pointed out that he said he disagreed with Woodford's, quote, methods and conclusions, unquote. Furthermore, he wasted 2 of only 8 lines in his tiny comment asking me if I missed that and why I'd comment if I didn't. This is a serious question. Is Suris trolling me? Is this a fucking troll? Am I being had here? Was this all an elaborate ruse designed just to mess with me? Was that one vague caveat seriously supposed to be taken as an adequate response to all of my criticisms? Like, what the actual fuck, Suris? This is a genuine question. Is Suris trolling me? Please tell me. I have to know. After that, in response to me questioning whether or not Suris is truly an ally of the trans community, I'm not fucking kidding, he launches into whataboutism. What about all the good things I've done, he cries, but I wasn't making some niggling complaint. Here's the thing, cis allies can shut down trans people for being too sensitive if they know what they're doing. I've seen it happen, and I've had it done to me. It's fine. I fully admit trans people are often way too sensitive. For good reason, but still too sensitive, and we need to be reminded who our enemies actually are. But this isn't one of those times. It's not like I was calling him a fascist for assuming my gender. It's not like I threw a tantrum because he forgot to put a space between trans and woman. I told him he was guilty of gaslighting, double standards, and defending overt fucking transphobia. This wasn't a minor mistake. If you fuck up that badly, I don't care what your trans resume looks like. No one should make a mistake like that. Ever. For anything. After that, Suris tries to conflate the terms bad move and bad faith. For those of you who don't know, those are not the same thing. A bad move is something that was unwise, either for yourself or for others. Which ironically means that Ethel's decision to publish the DMs was only a bad move because of Suris. On the other hand, something done in a bad faith is something done maliciously for the sake of accomplishing some kind of ulterior motive. But there was no malice and no ulterior motive in what Ethel did. If there is, show me. What Suris has done here is use conflation to try to retcon what he claimed because he has no fucking evidence. Was that something he did subconsciously? Possibly. Again, cognitive dissonance and even simple cowardice are powerful things. But at the same time, I find it hard to believe that any fluent English speaker could do this by accident. I'm starting to wonder if I should be giving him the benefit of the doubt. Those of you who are very sharp may have also noticed that Suris is trying to imply a false sense of fairness by pointing out that they highlighted times when they thought Ethel was acting in good faith. If Suris said nice things about Ethel as well as mean things, then surely Suris is being fair, right? But that's not fairness, that's balance. Literally. Suris' video is built on this idea of balance, and that's what makes it so terrible. Suris criticizes Ethel not because they did anything wrong, but because Woodford was also criticized, so Ethel needs to do something wrong to balance things out. Remember how Suris criticized the ACA's actions regardless of their intentions, and how that was a contradiction? That arose because Suris was trying to create the sense of balance where it didn't exist. But unlike Ethel's case, this wasn't Suris being hard on the ACA to make their actions seem comparable to Woodford's. If you think about it, Suris' point that the ACA's actions stand regardless of their intentions is much more rational and objective than this implication that actions and consequences don't count if they're done in good faith. Even though Suris begins with this idea that intentions are the only thing that matter, I think his analysis of the ACA's actions portrays his actual beliefs, and he softened his position when talking about Woodford because he needed something nice to say, and literally the only nice thing anyone can say about Woodford is he didn't do it on purpose as far as we know. Because Suris was going for balance, He was soft on Woodford to make it look like he did something right, hard on Ethel to make it look like they did something wrong, and only honest and rational in his analysis of the ATA's actions because only the ATA did good things and bad things. It feels convincing on the first viewing because of that balance, but if you pay attention to what's actually being said and compare it to what actually happened, you can see the blatant unfairness of it all. And finally, as if all of that wasn't enough, Suris misrepresented my criticism and his own fucking video. He claimed that he simply said to put the pitchforks down, but he didn't. If that was all he'd said, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If he'd acknowledged Woodford's transphobia, if he'd acknowledged that Woodford was absolutely in the wrong, and he'd acknowledged that the trans community have every right to be angry, but he'd told us that fire and fury will accomplish nothing and that he thinks patience would be best for everyone, we would not be having this conversation right now. I'd still disagree with Suris, and I'd still think he was a privileged idiot, but I wouldn't care, because at least he wouldn't be gaslighting the trans community. My problem isn't with someone preaching patience and cool heads. God knows I need some of that preaching at times. My problem is with misrepresentation, with attacking and guilting victims, with emotionally abusive tactics like gaslighting, and with defending someone who does not deserve a defense. And what's worse, Suris doesn't just misrepresent my criticism and his own fucking video, he also subtly attempts to demonize me. And I'll admit, part of this was a genuine misunderstanding that wasn't Suris's fault. People on the internet do tend to be fickle, and they do overreact, so it makes sense that Suris would assume the worst from me. But even if I go with the generous interpretation that he read my words as a disavowal of him as an ally, it doesn't matter. As I've said, ad nauseum at this point, he didn't make a minor mistake. He gaslighted the entire trans community for the sake of defending someone who has attacked us and refused to make amends. If, after that, we decide he's our enemy, then that's a title he's fucking earned. It's a knife he made for his own damn back. But despite that, despite the fact that I could easily accuse Suris of being a gaslighter, an abuser, a transphobe, and a fucking liar, I'm not going... Actually, you know what? Fuck it, I am going to do that. After writing all this out and reading it back, I can't help but think that an honest and benevolent person simply wouldn't be capable of it. Maybe Suris isn't malicious, but he's the only one who can prove that. I can't make excuses for him. Like Woodford, he got himself into this mess, and he's the only one who can get himself out of it. Regardless of his intentions, at present moments, Suris is a danger to trans people, the trans community, and everyone who might one day be a victim of oppression, bigotry, or abuse, which is to say, everyone. He cannot be trusted to be our ally. He can't be trusted at all. And while I feel sorrow over the way things have ended, I am not sorry. I don't have to apologize over holding people accountable for their actions, so I won't.